Hello and welcome to the podcast, Niti Nadarajah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Please allow me to introduce you properly. So everyone, Niti is a coach, freelance general counsel, DEI consultant and keynote speaker based in Melbourne with a passion for authentic and inclusive leadership. Niti advocates for a range of issues, including gender and racial equity, and through her business, Coaching by Niti helps to empower women who are feeling stuck in their careers to get unstuck by connecting them to their inner compass. She was recognised as a LinkedIn top voice, gender equity in 2022, and advises various companies and charities as an expert and mentor. So great to have you on the podcast, Niti. How are you today?
I am doing well. It's so lovely to be here with you. So doing really well.
Beautiful. Well, let's get straight into it. I would love to know, what does resilience mean to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you told me that you were going to ask me this question, I did a little bit of thinking about this, because I think my definition of resilience has changed over the years. I think way back when, if I reflect on when I was younger, resilience to me really was, that whole you just persist and you just make it through everything and you just remain really strong and you just keep going and, don't let things affect you. And it reflected in the way that I led my life. When I was younger, I was quite allergic to vulnerability, let's say, when I was younger.
I was allergic
to
vulnerability.
Yeah.
So many of us are. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think
how did that start for you? Like, how was that a mirror image in your life?
So I think one of the things that was really a big thing for me was not showing my emotional side to people, because I really did consider it to be a weakness. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think, growing up in with an Indian background, an Indian family, Indian community around us, talking about your emotional state, talking about your mental health just isn't a thing, or wasn't, at least when I was growing up. I'm sure it's changed a little bit since that time, but it really wasn't a thing, even less so, I think, than in, say, Australian society at large. And so that was a big thing. So that was how I was conditioned to approach emotions and mental health. And then I think there was a part of me that was also quite fearful of judgment and the reaction of other people. Like, I think that's always been, until probably the last few years, a really big issue for me. And so I think as a result, I think there was an element of me that was holding back from expressing my emotions, because what might people say, or what might people think? So I think that was a big thing. And then I remember really vividly when my grandfather died, when I was, I think, around about nearly 21, I think. And it was my first real up close experience of death. And he'd been living with us, so he was, quite close to me. And I remember we had my parents' friends come over to sort of offer their condolences. And this is a very sort of Indian community thing to do. Everyone gathers at home, you all sort of cry together and, say prayers and things like that. So it was really beautiful. But then one of the family friends took me aside and said, "You need to be strong for everyone else in your family now." And I was like, hang on, this is in the midst of, me having been quite upset and crying. And suddenly it's like, okay, no, you have to be strong. And my dad, who normally was the one who would hold himself together, at times which are a bit more stressful, was really distraught because it was his dad that had passed away. And so I could see that everyone else was distraught. And so, I took it upon myself in that moment to be the one that was strong, and that held it together. And so I remember, walking out because my grandparents lived in a granny flat in the backyard. Someone had asked me to get something from their granny flat, and I literally was like, okay, cannot cry, need to be strong. Walked over, saw his shoes at the front door. There's something about seeing someone's shoes when someone's passed away. It's just this reminder of the person that was, and the fact that, everything's just been left as it was before they passed. And saw the shoes and was like, must get in the door before I break down. And so took myself into the granny flat and then had a few moments of just crying before I went, okay, shake this all off and go back and now be strong again. And so I think for me, all these sort of little things and these messages over time just led to this idea of resilience being exactly that, being, this sort of armor that you have around you to stop things from affecting you. And I think it's only been later in life, and probably I think when I had my pregnancy losses more than anything else, that my opinion of what resilience was actually started to shift, because I realized in that moment how much I'd been suppressing over time and just how damaging that was to me personally, and how it was probably the opposite of resilience. So that was a big turning point for me. So I think for me now, resilience is almost the opposite. It's about facing the things that you are experiencing in life and almost coming to a form of a truce with them, right? Like a sort of acceptance of them, So yeah, I think that's more, I think, what it is.
That would create a different environment internally, wouldn't it?
100%.
Yeah, with them. And I suppose experiences that come, such as, I'm so sorry about your pregnancy loss, that would have forced you to create, to look at resilience differently, that experience alone. So I suppose, as difficult as that experience was, I suppose it became a gift in the end.
It did. And, it's interesting because when I had 2 pregnancy losses, and it was after I'd had my daughter. So it was quite unexpected because you almost think once you've had one child that the second one is just going to come along easily, because you've been through it and done it before and your body knows what to do. Not so much. And so, when I had my first loss, it ended up being what's called a complete molar pregnancy, where there's a risk of placental cancer, and therefore they have to monitor your HCG levels, which is your pregnancy marker, for quite a number of months and make sure that it's right down to barely nothing before you can try again. And so when I'd had my pregnancy loss, my immediate thought was, right, had a pregnancy loss, move on, try again, we'll get back on the wagon and we'll have a baby and it'll be fine because we'll be able to move on from this loss, right? Like, this is going back to my old way of being with resilience, right? And I couldn't do that because of this, complete molar pregnancy. And so I had to wait for months and months and months. And those months were agony, like the waiting was agony. And I felt so out of control, and being in control was, again, like similar to the resilience, a big part of how I had liked to lead my life. And so not being in control and having to wait and then being at the whim of, whatever might happen next was quite challenging. And so when I had a loss again the second time round, I was like, oh, I've done this before. It's not as bad this time round, is what I was telling myself, because I've been here. I've experienced these feelings before. Throw yourself into work, you'll be fine. And I did that for a period of time. And it was only, I think probably 3 months later, after my second loss, someone in a meeting said to me out of the blue, "You don't seem like yourself. Are you okay?" And there was like this sliding doors moment where it's like, I could say I'm completely fine, which is what I would normally do. And this moment will have been as if it never happened, right? Or I can be honest with not just them, but with myself in this moment and say, no, I'm really not okay. And in that moment, I chose that second option. And it was such a release to be able to express not just what was going on for me in that moment, but literally it was like an avalanche of like just everything, like all this emotion, all these things I'd suppressed for a long time just came sort of gushing out. It was almost as if I couldn't stop talking once I'd started talking. And so it really did dramatically change things for me. And I realized in that moment just how powerful it is to actually share what is going on for you. And it's kind of led me to be a lot more open with people generally about what I'm feeling, as compared to the me of before.
And how has that translated into other areas of your life in terms of you being able to express and be more open? How's that benefited you in your life personally and professionally?
Yeah, so I think professionally, this really came to light, I think, during the pandemic, where I really didn't hide from what I was feeling during that time, how difficult it was. And so really being able to express that, I think, with my team and my colleagues was helpful, I think, not just for me, but for other people as well. But more broadly than that, I think it has been really coming to grips with the idea that vulnerability is a huge strength, and that in being able to share my own experiences, and now I talk quite openly about pregnancy loss, I've talked about it in a newspaper, I've talked about it, I talk about it with women because I volunteer for an organization called Pink Elephants every week. So I talk to women who are going through pregnancy losses themselves. It actually has enabled me to heal from those losses. They'll never go away. They'll always be there. But I have been able to turn that experience into something that has, transformed my life in terms of the way I look at what are my strengths and my ability to then hold space for other people and be there for other people who might be suffering in the same way I was.
Definitely. And it's so hard being vulnerable, particularly when we create that armor out of protection for various different reasons of fear of attack, fear of being let down, fear of being disappointed, fear of being overwhelmed when we're already so stressed. So, I noticed you use, it's a beautiful analogy you use with the inner compass. I'm all about that inner anchor, the bamboo tree that therefore creates the flexibility. So do you think it is about that discovering your own inner compass that allows you to find that vulnerability?
Yeah, I think they've kind of gone hand in hand. I think, discovering my vulnerability and being able to lean into that a few years ago when I did have, finally sort of express my emotions around my pregnancy loss was sort of the starting point for me personally in terms of really discovering myself. And then from there, being vulnerable with myself has allowed, and with other people, has allowed me to explore other things that have been challenging for me over time. So, even delving into things like, for me, colorism was a big thing growing up. And this is, the whole, the stigma about having darker skin, and which is a big thing in the Indian community. They value fair skin over darker skin. And so that for me was a big thing growing up. And just even, being able to lean into what that felt like, what that looked like, and being able to talk about that openly is again a big thing. And each time, like, I explore more and more of these things and what are the deep underlying fears or things I'm running from, like, what am I running from? It just, I think all of it collectively has allowed me to really explore at a much deeper level who I am from an identity perspective. What are the things that guide me, or that, and both in a positive and in a not so positive way, right? Like, what are the things that, I run from? What are the things that I fear, as much as what are the things that I really aim for in life? But then also together with that, being able to really identify, what do I value? What is really important to me? What do I want to have more of in my life? All these things, it's been this sort of cumulative journey for me personally, which has taken, a few years. And it's why I now am in this space, because I just, I think so often we seek validation and we seek answers in the external world. Like, we look for advice from other people. We ask people, what do you do if? What would you do if? What should I do? And so when we're asking for answers from other people, or we're seeking answers in the external world, we often haven't connected with, actually, what are our own deeper motivations? What do we want? Like, what do I bring to this world?
Yeah.
What do I need in my life to feel the way I want to feel? Right?
Yeah. And most of our best decisions are made, you talk about most highly successful people, and typically it's after age 40, more in our 50s and 60s. But also it's the ability of all the men and women that have been studied that, really done exceptional things. It's the ability to close eyes, to go within, and then there's an answer that sparks up of what to do, that guidance. But how do we do that if we haven't gone into that journey of being able to go within when there's difficult emotions or pain or suppression that causes us to, more seek the external, because it's not comfortable to be inside. So we've got to do that work where we return back to ourselves, finding our inner compass, finding our inner anchor. And then inevitably that makes us feel more connected and alignment in the mind, body, and spirit. And I really believe that's what changes our energy and elevates us to therefore being able to access more elevated emotions of joy, love, compassion, resilience, and then we can let go of fear, anger, worry, all negative stuff. So if I were to ask you then those questions that you just spoke about, what were you running from?
What was I running from? Oh,
like
all sorts of things.
Snapshot.
In a small snapshot. So look, I think there are a few things. I think I have one of the things I reflected on recently was I was running from not being able to find belonging, particularly when I was younger. So I grew up in this Indian community, as I said, and I really struggled with an identity related issue around, who am I? I'm here, I'm in Australia, but my parents are holding on to this Indian culture, and, that was a big thing for them. But I never felt that I fit in or I belonged within this circle of people. And so I said to myself, you know what, this isn't me, and I don't want to have any part of this. And I would groan when my parents would say, you have to go to this, event or function or whatever. And I just didn't want to be Indian, right? Like I ran from it. And it's only been over the last few years, I've really discovered, actually, do you know what? The reason I was running is because I was so desperate to belong that I found the only way to deal with that was to reject it in its entirety and just go, I don't want it, And so I think that for me was a big thing. And I think it ties into a deeper need to feel loved, to feel, that connection with people. And I think that was something I ran from as well. I really kind of had this deep-rooted fear of, my ability to form relationships and connections with people. And so I ran from that.
And maybe that's what guides you now, is, if I was to ask you that next question, is what guides you is to feel love and connection?
Yeah, I think so. I think feeling love, feeling connection, and feeling purpose. I think that's been a big part of my journey over the last few years is really connecting into, what do I actually want to do in this life, and what does this mean to me? And, I think it was something that was really missing for me over the last 20 years, particularly from a professional perspective, was, there was just something missing in my career. And, I think it was really this element of, what am I actually doing and why am I doing it? And so being able to find, I guess, that purpose and a mission, and being able to give back, has been great. And it's, and you're right. I think in some ways that is about connection, because a lot of the work I do now is talking to people day in, day out. That's what I do. And it is connection.
Your work, coaching by Niti and we've got so many wonderful volunteer roles as well.
Yeah, it's been brilliant, and it really fills my cup, that ability to spend time with people, help them unpack what's going on for them. And, that moment when you see, and you would know this obviously too, being in this space, but when you see someone have a realization and you can see them processing, and it's, something's happened, something's changed for them, that moment is brilliant. Like they're the moments that you wait for in these calls that you have with people.
It is. Their whole face changes.
Yeah.
And you can feel that within yourself when you have that experience. It's a structural experience, like physically in your body. It's a biochemical experience because your brain's now firing differently, and you can feel a shift in your chemistry and even your digestive system, the blood, your nervous system, the way it's firing emotionally, and then that spiritual elevation and realization and awakening, that way it's like the veil comes off and you can see the world with these fresh eyes. Everything looks cleaner and whiter and more beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, that shift is amazing. And I think, over the last few years, I've had a number of those moments where things have just suddenly, shifted into place, and things have just really changed. And it's transformative, because you look at things differently. You look at the way that you're showing up for other people differently. But importantly, look at the way that you're showing up for yourself differently.
Definitely. So you're also an NLP practitioner, and you love to coach women to help them to become unstuck. You've got so many amazing roles. It's wonderful. The creative, cooperative, and angel investor at Nobody Studios. What do you do at Nobody Studios? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Nobody Studios is it's a slightly newer type of venture studio. It's in the States. I connected with someone a few years ago who was a large part of it, bringing it to fruition. And so when she spoke to me about it, and the whole idea is that it's, crowdfunded, so they get anyone can invest, which is why you're a nobody, right? So it's kind of bringing venture capital to everyone and allowing everyone to have a slice of venture capital. But their whole idea is to build an enormous number of companies, and to then launch these companies and then set them on their way. And so you just can't have this little piece of the pie, and you can also co-create, so which is kind of cool. So you can be involved in ideating what these companies might look like, and really helping to build them. So it's kind of cool. But I do have a lot of roles. Someone very wise said to me last year when I was starting my business, they said to me, what your biggest challenge is going to be over time? It's going to be discernment. And, he's not been wrong. That's been my biggest challenge, has been going, what do I say no to versus what do I say yes to?
Oh, you've done so much work over the years in terms of acquiring new knowledge in the mind. And then you're right, there's a point where we must stop and check in and transform that acquired knowledge into a new way of being, and with the learning. So who do I want to be in this world now after what I've learned with this new wisdom? Well, the wisdom comes from becoming it in your being.
100%, 100%. And I think, when you have that understanding, it's much easier to see when things don't align. Like I had this moment a couple of months ago where, I was working with someone and, what we were working on was fantastic, like really good stuff. But we had a conversation and the conversation just threw me off balance because there were things said that didn't align with my own personal values around, fairness and equity and things like that. And, there was a little bit of bias and judgment, I think, in what this person was saying. Some stereotypes sort of were brought up. And in that moment, I sort of went, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter how good the work is that we're doing in this moment. I can't do this. I can't be in this space because it just does not align with my personal values. And that alignment is important to me now. So I think, and I think it's a constant learning journey, right? Like, I don't think we can ever completely know ourselves inside out. But all we can do is continue to incrementally get to know ourselves better. And so for me, that's kind of the journey. And as I get to know myself better, I can, start saying no to these things where I go, actually, no, that doesn't work for me anymore because, it's out of alignment.
I love that, incrementally getting to know. And it feels less pressure. It feels like, it just feels kinder thinking about it in that way. I love that. I'm taking that on today. Can you give me 3 tips, Niti, of anyone listening today that I'm sure is so inspired by what you're sharing and that can absolutely relate if they're feeling perhaps like they're not understanding themselves or they're constantly looking for advice externally or they're going through something difficult in their life? What are your tips that you can share?
Yeah, I think, look, number one, it's a big one, but I think you need to make time to get to know yourself if you're in that space. And I think we often spend a lot of time just on autopilot, just, rushing through life from one thing to the next. And in doing that, and this is something I often have a lot of people say to me when they do coaching with me is, I've never spent this amount of time just reflecting, and we don't. And so I think making that time to reflect is really, really important. Yeah. I think working, and I don't want to plug coaching here, but, I do think it's important sometimes to talk to people who can help guide you on how to reflect. I think that is important because we don't know how to do it. No one's taught us how to do it. And we're so stuck in our heads and with our stories and the things that we've told ourselves over time, they've become unconscious. Like, as I said to someone the other day, there's this unconscious denial of things, right, that are true for us. And so it's only when someone can hear the language that we're using, hear the patterns in how we're showing up, or, the things we seem to be running from in conversation, that it's like a mirror reflecting back to you to go, here's what you just said. Tell me about that. And, it's as simple as that quite often, but it's having that mirror is I think often really important because it's hard to do it by yourself.
What we express is out of our awareness. So then you're, as a coach, identifying that through body language or, particular words used. And that is why find your people, find your tribe of people, your mastermind group that help you with your personal and professional journey as well. Like, to be successful in our careers, we need to run our ideas by people. And, a connection of network is how we grow things, but also in our personal life. How we need that tribe, and it might be a bunch of girlfriends, or it might be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a kinesiologist, or a coach, whatever works for you. And for me, it's a combination of all those things. But once you find the right, it changes everything. It really accelerates your growth.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And over the years, exactly as you've said, I've spoken to any number of people. Like I've, spoken to coaches, to healers, to yourself as a kinesiologist, obviously, as well, and to a number of different people. And I think that's important, right? And I think the third tip I would give to people, and I see this a bit, is don't hurry it. Don't rush it. I think people are often so desperate to find the solution that it's like, right, I need to fix this thing and I need to fix it yesterday, and often these things take time. And so, I've even had people who are like, I'd like to begin coaching and I'd like to do it like every week for the next 6 weeks. And I'm like, do you know what? You're rushing it too much. Let's leave some more time between. You need to have some time to go away and reflect, because the magic often happens in the in-between moments as much as it does in the sessions.
That's so true.
That's when you really start to go, oh, that pattern that my coach, kinesiologist, whoever identified, I did it again today. It showed up today. That's how it made me feel. Those are the moments that can really start to shift things for people. And so I think rushing to find solutions is often counterproductive as well.
Beautiful. Oh, that's so inspiring, Niti. I got so much out of talking to you today. I'm going to apply a few things to my life this week. And I'm so glad that I know you. And I'm so pleased you agreed to come onto the podcast this morning to share your story and the beautiful work that you do.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you loved this episode, please share, please subscribe, share the love. And I'll see you next time. Thank you again, Niti.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Bend Like Bamboo podcast. Please rate and share the episode with your community or anyone you think may need to hear this episode. If you would like any help with maximizing well-being and flexibility in your life personally, you can see me one-on-one at the private practice in Melbourne or on Zoom if you are not local. You can book in or find more info at benlikebamboo.com. If you would like help remotely, I have a resilience program you can do as an online course with 6 ebooks and videos on mind, body, food, connection that include resilience and tools that can help you to feel happier and healthier after rebuilding from change, stress, or illness. If you would like help with boosting resilience and wellness in the workplace, you can book in for a free Zoom discovery chat. The Bend Like Bamboo at Work program can be delivered in person or virtually. And if you would like to inquire about Bend Like Bamboo at school, you can find information on all these programs on my website, amandacampbell.com.au. And you can contact me on email, amanda@benlikebamboo.com. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. And remember that flexibility builds resilience. And no matter what you are going through, you can overcome it and discover what you are made of. See you at the next session.